I don't know, but suffices, that's not important to the events as they occurred. So when she arrived, James was drinking, he was pacing around. Whenever she pulled in, he locked the gate behind her and told her, "You're not leaving, you're staying here." So he was holding her against her will. He brandished a .357 handgun where he pointed at her, threatened to kill her, and also threatened to kill himself. She called James's brother, Robert, and said, "Hey, I've got some problems here." Robert tried to talk to him on the phone, didn't do any good. James then gives the phone back to his ex-girlfriend, puts the gun under his chin, and shoots. Shoots himself underneath the chin and into the face. She immediately dials 911. Deputies arrive. When we arrive, James is still conscious, sitting in a recliner, and it's obvious he's got extensive injuries to his face. He's got the .357 in his lap. The deputies give him commands to drop the gun, drop the gun, drop the gun, and he immediately cocks the gun. He's holding it in both hands. So he cocks the gun and he's starting to raise it up. At great risk and peril, one of our deputies decides, rather than to shoot according to protocol, I think I can save this guy's life by only shooting him in the arm or in the hand. Our deputy fires one shot, hits him in the right arm. He's holding the gun with both hands. He transitions to the left hand, and he's still got the gun in his hand. And our deputy shoots him again and shoots him in the left hand, and that ultimately goes into his thigh. He dropped the gun at that point. Deputies were able to get the gun away from him. They started giving him CPR, called in emergency services. He was rushed first to Winter Haven Hospital, then to Lakeland Regional, where he's in exceptionally critical condition from his gunshot wound. And I underscore, from his gunshot wound. The preliminary information at the hospital is that when he shot himself, there are either fragments of the bullets or of the skull or both that are deeply embedded into his brain, and his chances of survival appear very, very, very low. So obviously we start our investigations. We arrive with our homicide investigation team to work this investigation. We also do an administrative investigation for compliance with policies. Those detectives were on the scene last night. The state attorney's office was notified and on the scene last night. And the medical examiner will do the fourth investigation. All of the witness statements, our victim, who was held against her will and threatened with a firearm, tells a consistent statement, and certainly Robert, the brother, tells a consistent statement with the victim, and all of those statements are consistent with what our deputies learned, discovered, and did upon their arrival. I want to underscore that I think my deputy took a great risk to his personal life in order to try to save the life of James last night, because the protocols are you shoot to stop the threat, and trying to shoot arms and legs intentionally is a very dangerous maneuver, because if you miss, it gives him the opportunity to shoot and kill you. But I applaud the fact that he was doing everything possible to save James' life last night.
While this shooting happened, he's already had a gunshot in his chin. He was already dying. He's still with the gun.
Yeah, he still had the gun in his hand, and when we were telling him to drop the gun was in his lap, in his hands, he cocked the gun again and started to raise it up. Certainly the deputies, for fear of their life, all had the opportunity to legally shoot him and immediately end the threat. But our deputy chose to try to shoot him in his limbs, in his hands and his arms, in order to stop the threat without having to use force that would obviously cause him to become deceased immediately. So the investigation is underway. We don't see any indication of any conduct other than what's been described to you this morning. The witness statements coincide with the deputy statements. And once again, they put their life at significant risk last night.
How's that deputy doing since he did take those steps to not kill this man or try not to kill this man? How is he doing?
Sure. I can tell you that he is obviously distraught. You always are. No one wants to be in this position. He will be suspended with pay, which is normal protocol, through the initial parts of the investigation, and we also mandatorily require that there is a psychological debriefing with our staff psychiatrist before he can return to work. All of that's standard protocol.
How long has he worked for you all?
He can't, I'm not sure, we'll get that for you. He's been with us several years. He's a 77 number, isn't he, or 74 number. So he's been with us. He's not a new deputy. There were other deputies at the scene as well, but only one shot last night.
Is there something, people break up all the time, and sometimes they leave property at, the exes. Is there something the victim could have done to maybe prevent, can they get police escorts, or is there anything she could have done that maybe the outcome could have been differently here?
We'll dig further into the case as our investigation goes on. Last night we were dealing only with the discharge of the firearm and the initial part of the case. But at the end of the day, I don't know how she ended up there on a Friday night to retrieve the dog, if it was mutual agreement. That's details we'll work out later. But at the end of, when you look at the investigation, however, he'd been drinking heavily. He was pacing around. He was dangerous. He had a firearm. He threatened to kill his ex-girlfriend. He threatened to kill himself. He actually locked the gates to prevent her from leaving. And when Robert arrived, he took a set of bolt cutters and cut open the gates. So at the end of the day, it was just a terribly bad domestic violence event that, by the grace of God, none of our deputies were shot and killed last night. And he chose to take his own life. And we're fortunate that he didn't decide to take his ex-girlfriend out, because he was incredibly distraught that he couldn't have her back.
What about his criminal history? Is he a person that you all are familiar with?
He has some arrests from a long time ago, but no, he's got I think a lewd conduct and one other charge, but it was from literally decades ago.
Does he have kids, or where does he work?
No, I don't have that information this morning. Keep in mind the shooting just happened last night. Our detectives worked through the night. All of those kinds of questions will be dealt with in the follow-up investigation. And as is our policy here, we send you the best information we have at the time. Do I think these details we have for you today will change? No, there's no reason to believe that they will. But any investigation where we release information early is certainly subject to modification as the investigation goes on. And those kind of questions we'll ask later on.
The deputy making the move that he did, what do you encourage, deputies to do, since it's not, they're not supposed to just shoot in arm or leg, they're supposed to shoot to stop the threats. What do you encourage?
What I encourage our deputies to do is to follow their training and the protocols, because they're designed to protect not only themselves but other people in the area. And certainly when someone threatens you with a firearm and poses an immediate threat to your life or someone else's, great bodily harm or death, you have the right to neutralize the threat. Well, he neutralized the threat last night, but every time there's a shooting, they ask, well, why can't you shoot him in the leg or the arm, which is what happened last night. But that doesn't guarantee the threat's neutralized.
Where should they shoot?
depending what we tell people is we shoot to neutralize the threat, and that's a center mass shot to the chest. And the reason for that is clear, that the only time you shoot, that's not your first option, that's your last option, when this person poses an immediate significant threat of life to you or to someone else. So I can tell you this deputy really risked his life, because even when he shot the one arm, he was still holding the gun in the other. So he was still able to shoot the deputy, and then the deputy shot him again. But it was the grace of God. When he shot that one arm, he still could have discharged the firearm. So it was a very tense scene last night. Our deputy, at great peril, great risk to his life, to try to save James's life last night.
Were there other deputies in the room when all of this happened?
There were two other deputies there, and they did not shoot.
Just last question for me. Were your deputies aware of what had transpired before they arrived, that he had shot himself? Was that?
They were told while they were on the way there that he had shot himself, and they were immediately, so they knew he had not shot himself when they were dispatched. James shot himself during our travel period, and we did receive communications that he had shot himself. Quite frankly, they expected to go in and find him deceased. So it was somewhat of a shock when they walked in there, and here's a guy sitting in a recliner with his face all shot up and a handgun in his hand. And when they started commanding that he drop the gun, he actually cocked the gun again.
It sounds like it happened in a matter of seconds when they just got in the house.
That's how quick it happens. Seconds.
Sheriff, since you're here, can you give us an update on the search for Taiwan Blandon?
I can tell you that we're still searching for Taiwan Blandon. We gathered information he was around Macon, Georgia. Then we gathered information he was around Atlanta, Georgia. We have not found him yet. We are still looking for him around the clock. We consider him heavily armed. We know that he stole 4 firearms. We know that he killed a lady. We know that he not only killed her, but he killed her while she was cuddling her dog. We know that he shot at his friend's wife, or girlfriend. I don't think they're married, girlfriend. And we know that he shot an 80-year-old lady that was sitting in a wheelchair. He is incredibly dangerous, and we need to get him in jail sooner rather than later, and we've been looking for him. He's running, but we'll find him. I mean, he's from Fort Meade. His friends and relatives are from this area. Sooner or later, he'll show up, or we'll run him down in the meantime.
I'm assuming you also heard that Wauchula just charged him with 2 sexual batteries.
Yes, that's correct. And those were outstanding from investigations prior to this kerfuffle the other day, obviously. So this is a very bad guy. There's 2 sexual batteries there. He sexually battered this victim and shot and murdered another one. It's horrible. I mean, it's absolutely horrible. So we need to find him and get him locked up.
Also, since you're here, what is your reaction, or when you heard that your helicopter went down, and then like the traumatic rescue from the Coast Guard?
Well, whenever that event occurred, I was in Washington, D.C. meeting with the Attorney General. And I'll probably talk more about that last week. So, well, I'm sorry, I was on my way to Washington, D.C. to meet with the Attorney General. So I was in the plane in the air when our helicopter crashed. And I got the initial briefings, and I just thank God that everybody's alive and well. Helicopters can be replaced, lives can't. And I will get a detailed briefing. We've called in FAA and the NTSB to do parallel investigations to ours because it's an aircraft-related crash. And I appreciate the Coast Guard coming in and assisting with their heavy equipment, because this is one of the events when we needed their help. Where they went down is in a pond that they put materials from where they previously mined, and it's kind of like the consistency of toothpaste. So it was a very difficult environment to rescue from, and the rescue people did an outstanding job.
Have you talked to your pilot?
I haven't yet, but my staff's been with him. He's not hurt. He's okay. We can replace helicopters. I'm just grateful that both he and the other helicopter pilot are all right.
Have you heard any word about whether the condition of that helicopter, like, is it totaled or?
I'm not a helicopter expert, but it looks like to me that it's scrap metal. It's tore all to pieces. So I doubt very seriously that it's rehabable. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.